Welcome to Calumet Perspectives. I'm your host, Neil Nemeth, and I teach in the Communication and Creative Arts Department at Purdue University Calumet. My host today on Calumet Perspectives is Patricia Hales, who's the director of the vocal company, and I would say all-around musical, versatile performer slash creator in Northwest Indiana. Right?
I hope. I try.
Absolutely. And we're going to chat a little bit about Tricia's background during the first half of our program, and then in the second half we'll be talking more about the activities concerning PUC and PUC people. The first question, though, I'd like to ask is, you were born and you grew up in Gary, and yet you have this avid devotion to music and musical theater particularly. How did this come about?
Well, I come from a kind of a musical family. My mom and dad both loved music. My mom was a registered nurse. My dad was started out as a mechanic and then ended up as a gas serviceman for NIPSCO. But his side vocation and his real love was music. And he played in the Northwest, what was then the Gary Symphony for 25 years. He was flute and piccolo and taught private students and played in several Musicians Guild concert bands. And my mom and dad both loved musical theater. And so from my earliest recollection, aside from church music, was running around our living room when I was about 4 or 5 years old, singing the score to South Pacific, because that was one of my mom's favorite musicals, and she always had it on the record player. And my dad's flute teacher was actually principal flutist at the Schubert, what was then the Schubert, I think it's LaSalle Bank now, but was the Schubert Theater in Chicago. And so we got to go in and see a lot of musicals there. And then he started playing for musicals at our fellow institution, IU Northwest. When they were doing their big musicals, they would hire in musicians from the Musicians Guild. And he would play in those pit orchestras, and I would go to those. So I had a love of music from my earliest recollections. And my parents were very much supporting me and encouraging me and giving me opportunities to study. I studied piano lessons, started piano lessons in 3rd grade and continued right on through college, and started voice lessons in 9th grade and continued. That was my major in college, was voice performance.
Yeah. It sounded like there was no other real option for you.
I love history. I loved history. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about what other lines of work we might have gone into. And I loved history. I loved home economics, as a matter of fact. And I even thought about nursing for a while, but I loved biology but hated chemistry. So I knew I would never survive. And when I thought about what I could see myself teaching until I retired, music always came to the top of the list. And I figured no matter what happened, I could always, teach music lessons. I could always do music as, volunteer. For some organizations, there's always opportunities to play. So, that was my first love.
Well, and actually, you mentioned your interest in history. There's a sizable component of history that's related to the music.
Absolutely. And I'm fortunate here that I teach several music history courses, and it just dovetails beautifully. I mean, that background, I've always been fascinated by it. I've always been fascinated by the composers themselves, why they wrote what they wrote, that it's not just a bunch of music, that there was a reason. What was going on in their time periods influenced what they were creating. And that's one of the things that I try and incorporate into my courses.
Yeah, you mentioned the composers, and tell us the ones that seem like they're the most important to you.
Well, I'm prejudiced. Beethoven is my absolute favorite of the classical composers. Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, and Dvorak are my 3 favorites. And Dvorak, I think, because I'm Czechoslovakian on my mom's side. And so I have that early love of music. And Beethoven, because when I was, somewhere in elementary school, my mom used to always go to any library sales of books and things like that, and she brought home a biography of Beethoven, a children's biography of Beethoven. And I read it, and from that moment, he was my guy. I mean, he was, I wanted to play everything by him. And of course, you know, at that time, I wasn't really playing at all. But I just fell in love with his music, and anytime my dad was playing a symphony concert where Beethoven was, you know, on the roster, we went to, you know, we definitely went to hear it. And so it was a good way to build my interest in music and my interest in history as well.
Yeah, that's a kind of a varied, the three you mentioned are from varied backgrounds.
Right. Beethoven is a classical composer, of course, but he's also the transition composer into the Romantic period. And then Tchaikovsky and Dvorak both come under the Romantic umbrella, but they're more nationalistic. In other words, their music really kind of reflects the country that they came, Russia and Czechoslovakia. Tchaikovsky has the more classical bent, but Dvorak was in that, you know, kind of classical and Romantic period as well. But as far as music history, if any of my music history students are listening, it's like, no, Beethoven's in the classical period, Tchaikovsky and Dvorak are in the Romantic.
How about the more popular American composers?
Well, as I say, I'm a musical theater nut, so Richard Rodgers is one of my absolute favorites. And of course, I respect George Gershwin was amazing. Cole Porter is a fellow Hoosier. But I think there was a uniqueness about Richard Rodgers, especially when he wrote with Larry Hart and then again with Oscar Hammerstein. His styles of music changed to fit their unique perspectives. And it's reflected in the music and the musicals that they wrote. And then, of course, I love Stephen Sondheim. I think the man is a genius. And I love delving into his musicals because they make you work. I mean, when you both from a lyrical perspective and from a musical perspective, because they're not easy to play. It's like every one of his shows has kind of a musical, I call it a secret to it. And once you understand how he's put that musical together, then the whole show makes sense. And the lyrics are so important. That's one of the wonderful things. I had two very wonderful voice teachers in my career. I had one that I had in high school. Her name was Martha Dubin, and she was right here in Gary. And then I studied the 5 years that I was at IU School of Music. I studied with Eileen Farrell. And she especially taught me the importance of not only diction, but interpretation, to really look at a lyric and communicate it. Because the thing that separates the singer from every other musician is the words. And so if you're not doing those words justice, then the audience is losing out.
You mentioned Eileen Farrell and her influence on you. It's important, I think, for the audience to understand that she's really one of the handful of vocalists who could be credible in both the classical and operatic field and also the American popular song.
Right.
What sort of inspiration did you draw from her?
She was so down to earth. Even though she was, I guess you would say, a name. I mean, there were some big name teachers at IU when I was there, and she was one of two that if you could get into her studio, that was something. And I was the only freshman that she took my freshman year, and I felt very, very honored. But she just made you feel so at ease, and you just wanted to absorb everything. I mean, you just wanted to sit like a sponge. And she was very practical. She was very good at treating each student differently. The fact that you could, I mean, everyone that walked in that door, she had 18 students most of the time that I was studying with her. And each one of us, of course, was different personality-wise and vocally, and she just had the ability to figure out what you needed and encourage you in that way. And sometimes it meant coming down on your case, and other times it just meant building you up so that you had the confidence in yourself to do what you needed to do. And she would still concertize. She would still go out usually a couple weeks a year and do her concert tours. And a couple times she came to either Bloomington or Indianapolis, and a lot of us would go and see her. And to see her do what she was telling us to do in the studio, practicing what she preached, was a huge, just a huge emphasis and a huge encouragement to what we were trying to do.
You mentioned earlier on that you were studying piano and studying voice. At one point in time, one of those became more important. How so, but how did the other one still figure into your repertoire?
I always loved piano, and I do play probably more than I sing anymore, but I always had a problem memorizing in piano. And I had a wonderful piano teacher, but she wasn't real big on memorization. And I think I really developed kind of a mental block, and I never understood how to memorize. I had a friend in college who was a piano and organ double major. And it just went in her eyes and came out her fingers, and the music could be put away. And she tried to explain to me how she did it, and I just could not, could not do it. And I had a piano teacher in college who wanted me to double major, and I said, I cannot do it. I don't understand the process. And I said, for voice, it just comes naturally to me, and I love it, and I can memorize, and that's where I really, really wanted to be. And I wanted to be a voice teacher. I wanted to, teach other students, not necessarily have a career myself, but to be able to do vocally what I wanted to do, but then to teach others.
Yeah. And I guess the last question we have in this segment, the challenge between performing and the acting that you've done versus the directing and the accompanying. Can you give us a little sense of the difference between those two?
Yes. For me, the reason that I went from being on stage and performing to music directing is because I got to the point, and this was something Miss Farrell and I talked about at one point in time, I got to the point where I didn't want to look and say, I want to be up there, or I could do that better than that person. I was sitting in the audience thinking, boy, if they only did this, or if her teacher would just work with her in this area, she could improve so much. And as an actor or an actress in a show, you can only really influence your part. I mean, you can encourage others in the show, but you can't go up to them and say, you have to fix this or you have to work on that. Whereas the music director can. The music director can take that person aside and say, we need to get together and we need to go over this, see if we can fix it.
Great. Wow. And we're going to learn more about that in the second half of Calumet Perspectives today, but we're going to take a little break right now and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Calumet Perspectives. I'm Neil Nemeth, and I teach in the Purdue University Calumet Communication and Creative Arts Department, and my guest today is Patricia Hales, who is the director of the vocal ensemble for Purdue University Calumet. And in this segment, we're going to spend some time talking about the activities of the vocal ensemble, and I'm sure there are a lot of things to talk about, Trish.
Well, we try and keep busy. The vocal group that we have here on campus is the offshoot of a larger group that existed under my predecessor, Judy Leslie Walker, and it was called Song Company, and they were in existence for 20 years, and then, excuse me, because of budget cuts, they lost their funding, and we started putting a group together back in 2003, 2004, and have slowly been building. We also have an a cappella group on campus that is trying to build their numbers. It's kind of tough because it's a commuter campus largely, and so you have a lot of people coming and going, but we normally meet Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3:30 to 5, and right now we have 12 members in our group, and we have a couple of programs for this spring. Of course, we always sing at graduation, and then we are doing a program in Calumet Falls, which is our lounge area here on campus, on May 1st, and then we're doing an off-campus program for the senior citizens at Hartsfield Village on May 2nd, and so we just go from there.
Tell us more about these upcoming events.
Well, the students asked if they could do a program on campus, and we were going to try and do it in our normal venue, which is Wine Chambers Hall, but that has so many commitments for this time of year that the students suggested, why don't we just go to Calumet Falls, because there's a piano there. And so that's what I checked with the powers that be, and they said the time and the space was available. So our concert this year is all Disney and movie music. And so we've got things from Mary Poppins, and we have a leading ladies medley that celebrates the ladies of the Broadway stage. We've got a lot of soloists participating in the medleys. So it should be a good program. I think the kids are enthusiastic about
And do you
it.
find students react very well to the material if it's in a popular movie?
Yes, I mean, I already have requests for next spring. Usually, of course, our holiday program is more the traditional carols of the period, but in the spring we try and do kind of a themed concert, and the request for next spring is childhood favorites. And so I already have a list of, when I go to the music store, I have a list of things I have to look for and see if I can find. And so it's fun. It's great. And we have a great group here. So
larger group would be Desire, but they're enthused, it sounds like.
yes, we're small but mighty. That's what I
Yeah,
say.
well,
You know, and I would rather have a small group of really committed students than of course I'd love to have a large group.
Sure.
But sometimes the larger groups, you're just getting them to sing notes. When you have the smaller group, you can work a little bit and nuance things a little more. So.
Describe the level of experience that many of the students have when you audition them and place them in your ensemble.
Well, I'm very fortunate because we have some great choir programs in the area. My current group is largely from Munster, Crown Point, Lake Central, and those are all Maryville. They're all well-established choir programs, and we have a lot of others in the area, but that's, excuse me, where my current crop is from. And they all have, the choral directors, because I know most of them personally, are a little bit different in technique, and so when they come here, it's melding. It's like a melting pot, almost, a musical melting pot, because you're melting different styles and different techniques and different backgrounds. But they all have a really strong ability to read music. They pick up quickly, and they're willing to work, and that's what makes it important. So.
Contrast the program you just described with what you tend to perform, for instance, at the Hartsfield event that's coming up.
Well, actually, we're doing the same program there. We do a lot of, what I try to do is put songs in the program that will appeal to a wider audience. And in this case, we're doing Cole Porter medley, really nice medley of music, again, from the 30s and 40s that will totally appeal to that audience. A lot of the songs that we're doing, like the Mary Poppins medley, and my favorite things from Sound of Music, the Leading Ladies medley, they are all melodies that audience will recognize. Some of their children probably grew up with those movies and those songs, and so it's going to be something that they will enjoy listening to.
You mentioned the number of communities that you draw on for the vocal ensemble. You're also involved in a lot of the school activities, and you've been involved in community theater. So how important are the contacts that you make in the various communities to what you're doing here?
I think they're very important because Purdue Calumet draws from such a wide area, and part of it is the opportunity to let students know that we're here. When I'm doing different productions or working with the students at different schools, they know I'm from Purdue Calumet. They have the opportunity to know what we offer here. And sometimes they're surprised that it's a music person, but then I have the opportunity to tell them, like in our department, what goes on in communication and creative arts, our TV program, our radio, all the different elements that make up communication. And the opportunities that you have here, that by going to a smaller campus, it's uniquely focused on you, and you're not lost in the crowd when you go to a big school. I mean, I went to IU school. It's a huge campus in Bloomington, and I know the advantage of going to a smaller campus and having that personal attention, and the fact that you can just walk in your professor's office and sit down and talk to them, and they have the time. And so it makes a big difference. But it also gives me the opportunity to, the directors are very supportive. I mean, they know that we're here, and so oftentimes when they are sending students to Purdue Calumet, they'll say, well, Ms. Hales teaches there. They have this program here, or you should look up her choir. I have two in my choir right now that are from my affiliation with Crown Point, one from Highland. So you start to make those connections, and sometimes it's just one or two people, but that's more than you would have had in the first place.
Yeah.
So.
Tell us about some of your teaching activities, both here on campus and also private teaching as well.
Well, I do private lessons 1 day a week at Crown Point High School. They allow private teachers to come into their school and give lessons. And it's a great way. I love working with my college students, but I love working with the high school kids. I have the opportunity, in fact, just this past spring, I vocal coached their high school production at Crown Point of Bye Bye Birdie. And I love working with the kids. There's so much energy, so much enthusiasm. Sometimes a little bit too much. It's like, I'm so glad to come back to the college level, but just for that brief time, it's great to interact with those kids and see what they're doing, hear what they're doing, hear what their interests are, because I think that helps to keep us more aware of where these students are coming from. A lot of times, I don't think we're as aware of what's going on in the high schools and how advanced these kids are when they come here, and we have to keep progressing with the time, so to speak.
Yeah. You still do some performing and some ranging and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah,
Tell
a
us
little
about
bit,
those.
yes. I usually, anymore, I'm just performing in church or demonstrating for my students or demonstrating when I'm in a music rehearsal, that type of thing. But right now I'm getting over bronchitis, so my voice isn't there yet, but it's coming back slowly but surely. But when the need arises, I will arrange music if there's something that needs to be done or a song that needs to be revoiced or that type of thing. I'll do a little bit of arranging. I did more when I was first out of college, but not quite so much anymore. But I do a lot of vocal coaching and that type of thing for musical theater, for area theater groups as time permits. I usually have time over the summer and then maybe in the fall. So I love to keep busy and to keep kind of my finger on what's out there, so that I, as they would say in the industry, keep your chops fresh.
Of course.
So that you know what's out there and you're keeping current.
My perception is that despite having a lot of opportunities to see things in Chicago, there's still a lot of interest in community theater in this area.
There is, and we are very fortunate because we have an unusually strong community theater group. We've had a lot of kids come from this area. I'm very happy to say several of them have been some former students of mine that have gone on to careers in Chicago, in New York, different places. And we have a strong theater commitment. We have a lot of the Excellence in Northwest Indiana Excellence in Theater Foundation is a group that helps to foster that. And I mean, there are at least 12 or 13 different theater groups community theater groups across the region that helps students kind of reinforce their interest. If they don't get it in high school, or if their high school program is not as maybe as active or as strong, they have opportunities to go out and expand their knowledge. And the great thing is in theater and in music, there are so many things behind the scenes as well, as you were alluding to before.
Yeah.
The technical aspects, the computer graphics, the lighting, the set design, the costuming, sound design. There are so many things behind the scenes that if you don't feel that you are comfortable on stage or gifted in that way, they can use your talents in other ways. I mean, you can always find something for people to do, and it's a great outlet and a great way to meet people. I have some former students who they've majored in other things in college, but I say, you know, keep your music, keep your theater, because when you go to a new place, I have a former student that he's down in Miami, Florida now, but he's got his degree in accounting. He's very high up in one of the health organizations there. But as soon as he moved, he started auditioning for local theater groups. He, you know, his music and his theater background is giving him opportunities to make new friends and network, and it's a great outlet.
So it sounds to me like your message for a young person who thinks, well, maybe music should be what?
There are a lot of options. I will say music is a hard field to major in, and it's a hard field to get jobs in. And so you have to go into it with your eyes open. If it's the only thing you can picture yourself doing, go for it. But if not, it's not copping out to go into another field that you love, that you can see yourself getting a job in, and using your music as a side, you know, for outside activity.
Okay, very good. My guest today on Calumet Perspectives has been Patricia Hales. I'm Neil Nemeth, and thank you for watching.